feel like we all just went through something together. All right, I'm very pleased to introduce Michelle Memran. Michelle is a journalist and filmmaker, obviously. She's worked for nearly 20 years as a reporter and researcher in New York City. And her award-winning documentary feature debut, The Rest I Make Up, has screened worldwide at festivals, universities, and museums, most recently at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. Michelle has been a MacDowell Fellow in Artist in Residence at Brown and visiting instructor in feminist, gender, and sexuality studies at Wesleyan, most recently. And she's a visiting artist here right now. Gabri Christa is here, and we're so lucky she is part of the dance department at Barnard College. Hello, thanks for being here too. Gabri is a choreographer, a dancer, and a filmmaker. She's received a Guggenheim Foundation grant for her choreographic work. One of her most recent pieces, Magdalena, is a hybrid film and choreographic work for intimate audiences, I will say, that explores her own mother's journey through dementia. Gabri is, I have to read this like so carefully, she's an Atlantic Fellow for Equity in Brain Health at the Global Brain Health Institute at University of California, San Diego. Wasn't that her? Great, so I'm gonna ask a couple questions while you work up what you wanna say, okay? So many places to begin with the film. We decided to frame this conversation around issues of mental health, aging, and dementia. But that doesn't mean you have to go there, but that's where we're gonna start. So I think in the beginning you didn't know you were making a film, you were just filming.
Yeah.
So then at some point you probably realized you're making a film. And then I'm wondering what you thought it was gonna be about, and when the issue of Irene's changing brain health became part of the story, and if it was part of the actual filming or more in the editing process that this came up.
Well, is this on?
You're on.
I'm on. Well, actually, the whole project was the catalyst for the project was the fact that Irene was losing her memory. And so when we had become friends, I'd interviewed her for this article, and we became friends, and I would just like visit her in the West Village. I was totally in love. I mean, there was a great kinship between us, and over time, she wasn't leaving her house. She wasn't, and it was, and she wasn't writing. And she was talking about how she wasn't getting called to teach, and she wasn't getting called, she wasn't writing, and I started to get concerned, and so I called her agent, Morgan Jeunesse, and I said, I'm a friend of Irene's, and I'm just wondering what's happening with her, and who's taking care, I think she's got some cognitive issues. And so Morgan basically said, yes, we're aware of it, she won't go to a doctor, and we're trying to get the community to rally, but it's very hard, people are very busy in New York, so then I just sort of I had a job that Irene kept telling me to quit as a fact checker, but I kept that job for a long time. Really funded the film, and then for 15 years. But so Irene, I just sort of upped the game, and I would leave my job for many hours and go bring food, and we would sit and talk, and then one day you saw it in the film. It was like there was no. I had this crappy camera. The camera got better as the filming went along for the decade, but. So I had this camera, and we were just on Brighton Beach, and I said, does the camera bother you? And you saw that monologue, and that was, so I called Morgan, and I said, Morgan, what if we just, she's writing monologues for the camera, I feel like this would be a really great creative project, and I was also really lost, I was coming out of the closet right around that time, and Irene was so she was many things to me all at once. And Morgan said, go for it, do it. And I was like, great. So I would call Irene up, and she'd say, are we going to work today? And I'd say, yeah, we're going to work. So it began, the project wasn't, we had no intention of making a film. That's why it took so long to make, because we found the film in the footage, but there was, it really was, the whole process was about, continuing a creative process for us both. And reinventing what it means to write, actually. So it wouldn't have happened if Irene hadn't had her memory issues, there was no way, I didn't know her very well when she was writing plays, but she wouldn't have been around. She hates journalists, so she wouldn't have let a journalist in, she wouldn't have let a film crew in. So the whole reason that, it started was because of the friendship. So that's how it started, yeah. It's a long answer to that question.
That is good. We needed to know that. Gabri, you made a very personal piece about your mom, Magdalena, her name and the piece's name, yeah. And you're also working publicly to raise awareness about dementia, mental health, aging. And I wonder if this new subject matter is changing your work. Is it a plunge into the unknown, or is it highlighting concerns that have always been there for you?
Well, I first want to say thank you. I saw it last night when you sent the link, and it's one of the most beautiful portrayals of Alzheimer and dementia, actually, because so I'm gonna get to your answer, but I really wanted to applaud you that through discovering all these different subjects, you actually took the journey of dementia, because that's what it is, right? That the not knowing and going with the flow and all of that. And also kind of the joy of being in the moment. And I was really impressed with how, when you were interviewing, that you could be in the moment. Because one of the hardest things that I've learned is that that you have to let go of who the person used to be with a person with Alzheimer and dementia. You just can't, you just have to go with it. And so I love that you did that. That's very rare that people will be able to do that, actually.
Well, I think it's much easier when you're not, I mean, when it's your mother. I think about this a lot because my mom is going through some issues,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a lot more complicated. You know, I think there is something about having not known Irene before,
Mm-hmm.
there was no sense of loss. For me,
Right.
it was just like I met her with this, you know, with
Right.
this, while she was dealing with it. So I can only imagine dealing with it in your family, how different that is. You know, it's a lot harder to let go.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely, but that's also the lesson, so to come back to your question, is that how it changed is just learning to be in the moment. I think it changed me a lot as an educator, to just really, you know, embrace what is, and also in the creative process, which actually Irene talks a lot about, and just, you know, just going with what is, and even the earlier footage with just being in the body, and then making yourself a vehicle for creativity. And on a level, I felt with Irene that because she has that capability, she almost has better equipped to deal with the Alzheimer's. I don't know, I was like thinking that when I watched her. Because there's kind of an acceptance of it. Oh, I'm losing my memory, and that's normally comes very much later stage in life. So, yeah, just thinking about creativity, I think that's how it changed the practice. And I actually looked at everything different, and looking at ageism means the festival I'll be doing. I don't have the card yet, but Susanna is here. Who is Susanna? We just looked at pictures, films about the aging, moving body. So looking,
Where's that?
that's going to be here,
Oh,
April
it's gonna be
4th.
here.
Yeah,
Oh, great.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
awesome.
So the dementia had made me look at other isms and ageism, and also the stigma around dementia. There's a lot, like people don't show up, they don't know what to do. There is a lot of impatience, and it's hard because even the moment they went to Cuba, and she said, "Oh, we were in Cuba." You know, I've been with my mom. I've been taking her to this and to that, and we had a great time. And then next day she's like, "God, it's been so long since you're here." Like, and you go like, "Go," you know, those moments. But for them, it's you know, that's not as hard. But Irene said it really lovely in the film. She said, "Why did you have to tell me that it was a month that I didn't see you?" Because now I'm suffering, right? That was just so amazing to me.
Well, the moment there's no, I mean, Irene would talk about this all the time. We would talk about in the moment there's no problem.
Right,
You know, and
right.
there's something about if you can just meet someone where they're at, and that's what you do in the creative process too.
Right.
Like you meet, and in the theater, I mean, you're meeting, well, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think that's, you know, we were so in the moment that there wasn't any problem. You know, it wasn't like, and the problem came, you know, when thinking about the past and thinking about the future, you know, like where she was going to end up. And this was 3 years we only filmed, I mean, basically, because it was a collaboration, so when she forgets what's happening with the camera, when she's not saying, oh, camera, you know, like, and there's a moment in Miami where she just stopped recognizing the camera and knowing what we were doing. And so when we were in the edit room, I was like, the film has to end here, because that's the end of the collaboration and her consent. And also it's about dignity, and we're not gonna take, I mean, I know a lot of films, like one of my favorite films is First Cousin Once Removed. And Alan Berliner takes this, his First Cousin Once Removed poet all the way to the end of this journey of Alzheimer's. And I knew that this film was not gonna be that, because there's, it is a collaboration. So it was really interesting kind of trying to figure out like how far do you go, and so, yeah, because people ask about the ethics about it and about consent. So that comes up in some of the Q&As, and so.
Yeah, I just personally thought that you did that beautifully, because there's also there's also still joy, right? I think the sadness is a lot for us, and the sadness is like for my mother has frontotemporal dementia, so it doesn't start with memory loss, it starts with behavioral changes, and which we didn't recognize, because we're like, she definitely doesn't have dementia because she's remember.
How old is she?
She's now 84.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's been on the frontotemporal started younger, so it's been a really like I would say 20 years. So then you don't recognize it, and then she knew something was wrong, but she's trying to hide it. So those are the anxiety about, oh, something is wrong, what's going wrong, not knowing where you're walking, and then being like, oh no, I knew where I was going, I was just thinking about something, like she was smart enough to figure out how to come up with another answer. But the moment, like now, she's like, oh, I just don't remember that anymore. And then she's fine with it, right? She's far enough so that there's no more fight against memory loss. And so I wondered about that in the film for you. The moment of, like I was wondering, to me, she seemed like she was so okay with having the memory loss. Or was she?
Except for that moment in Miami, when she says, I'm a playwright, I need to keep writing. I need to be in New York for my community. I mean, to me, that's the very difficult moment to watch. It must have been to live.
Well, it was very hard to include that. I mean, but it was, I mean, it's one of the moments where, I mean, there were very few people asked if she got upset, if Irene was upset, about her memory, or about if there were any conflicts between the two of us. And there were, I mean, but like very few. And it was mostly when I did what I did, and which I would never do now, because I work with people with Alzheimer's, and I know I have, you yes and. It's not about like correcting the person and saying, but you're not writing. Like it's always excruciating for me to watch that scene, because it's just like, why are you telling it? Why are you doing that? Michelle, like, what are you doing? But it's important, because those are the moments that people actually have with their loved ones, with their friends who have this disease. Like, you have those moments, where you're just like, are you kidding me? You don't know that and the frustration comes in. It's always harder for the caretaker or the friend or the daughter or the son, and so it's, we didn't want to like not include that in the movie, I mean, that's a part of the whole thing. But Irene was like, and the emotional scene, she was very emotional after seeing John Guare and kind of been on the street, because it was just like, I think she was so isolated and so alone and so longing. She was really living, because she was living so far in the past, because her short-term memory was decreasing and her long-term memory was becoming clearer and clearer. So she was remembering Cuba, and she was remembering off-Broadway. And so she really was living in those off-Broadway days, which was like her glory days. And so seeing John Guare triggered all of that for her, like the fact that she wasn't a part of that community, or feeling a part of that community anymore, that she had felt forgotten. And I think those are really real things. She felt very forgotten and very unacknowledged, and she would say her students are more famous than she is, and you know, go on and on. And so it's she did have those moments, but they were then she'd flip it. She'd have a moment, and then the next second she'd make a joke. So you were just like, oh wow, this is, so it allows for the laughter. I mean, I think that she was always the most entertaining person to be around. I mean, it was like being around her was like I'm a very anxious person. So I always say like being around Irene was just like the ultimate Xanax. It was just like boom, you're just you're with her and you're only with her, you know. And so and she commanded a lot of attention. So you're just like okay. But yeah, I mean, she didn't ever feel sorry for herself. So it allows, one of the things that the film allows us to do is to laugh, because she's not taking herself so seriously. So you can, feel free to laugh, because it's like, I mean, I think she would love that about this film. She never saw the final cut, but she saw, 20-minute samples and all of the things that I was concerned about in terms of the memory and the shot. I was always, people say like, it's so artistic, your shots, and I'm like, well, I don't know about artistic. I mean, we're having a conversation, I don't know what I'm doing, and so I have the camera down at this angle, so all the shots are like looking up at Irene. But in the elevator, when she was like in the smoking jacket, I mean, I could not put the camera on her face, because it was like, but I had it, so it's cut off, but like, I wanted her to see all those moments and to make sure that she was giving the okay with it. And her biggest note was like, I don't want any of these talking heads. She's like, I wanted just more me. She's like, I don't need to hear people talking about me. I just want more me. So that was her biggest note. The memory stuff she was totally fine with. She was like, I never had a memory. I didn't lose it because I never had it to begin with. So yeah.
A true movie star.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a diva. Yeah, for sure.
I'd love to hear from any of you. Any questions or comments? We have a roaming mic.
The question that comes for me is how that stands out is the journey that she took you to finding yourself while she was losing herself, that you never knew. And the person that you never knew, she helped you to find. So the film in that way encourages all of us. For me, it really encourages me to not be afraid of whatever it is, because I really have nothing to lose, and even in losing, I can gain. So I just want to thank you and ask you how that journey for you was in meeting her and how she moved you to finding yourself.
Oh my gosh, that's so emotional. Wow. I think I've done enough of these. Well, I mean, it's a very different situation watching the film now for me, because I've been in treatment for cancer for the past couple of years, and I actually was diagnosed right when the film came out. So I spent 15 years making it, and then like a week after we got to our first festival, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So watching the film now, and so we traveled with it, going that whole time, and I was going through treatment, and I was just like, I can't believe, like the timing of this is just insane. So I watch it now, and I get something totally different than I did when we actually were finishing it, because I feel like when she's talking about not hiding it, when she's talking about like, the being in the moment, the uncertainty of everything in the world and everything and your own, body and I watched the movie in a totally different frame of mind. So I think that she basically, I am an artist now because of Irene, I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that like I would have totally stayed as a fact checker, and not to say there's anything wrong with fact checking. I think it's a fantastic career, but it was just not right for me, and I think that I don't know how to answer that question, but I think that we helped each other. It was the whole thing was that it was a relationship, and it was and I wasn't even going to be in the film, so it would have been totally other thing. It would have been much more talking heads. There would have been a whole talking head fest. Yeah, I mean, she gave me. Everyone always says, "Oh, it's so great you were there for her," and I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like I was the lucky one, you know." So I guess we were both lucky. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, I just want to say that thanks to all three of you for raising the consciousness of the people. I want to say the fact that you're concentrating on women's theater, I think that's notable. The fact that this film is actually here for posterity is as a teaching tool as well. I mean, it's also entertaining. I also want to say to you, you know, that your study and willingness to put out the word about dementia, which is something that we used to, in the extended family, just say, oh, that's grandma sitting there, or you know, the children are running and jumping off of her, and nobody ever really bothered to study it or even mention it as anything except, oh, she's senile, but that was said lovingly. And so now, as I'm approaching 80 in the 2 months, I am looking at, in fact, I was just telling my partner before we started to view this, there are certain things that I'm forgetting, and I'm okay with forgetting it because I'm thinking I don't want so much, I don't want 80 years of stuff on my, you know. At the same time, there is a little concern. I say things like I need to rest more, I need to, you know, these kinds of things. But I think that intergenerational relationships is the only way to go. I've been saying this for about the last 20 years.
That's proven actually, and the one thing that we need to do, and I thank you, I'm sorry, I just had to jump in, is more intergenerational stuff. It's good for the brain, it's good for everybody, it takes away from the isolation, and also there's this whole learning curve for it.
Exactly.
And a little bit of memory loss is normal, doesn't mean dementia when you get older, by the way, I've learned that. So, and there are over 60 forms of dementia. Alzheimer is one of the most well-known dementia, but it's not, dementia is not Alzheimer. There are very many forms.
So I just want to close in saying that the grandma used to say, my grandmothers lived for 96 and 97, both of them. And so one of them used to say, getting old sure is a mess. And I think, you know, and so we would laugh, but I think that it doesn't have to be so much of a mess if we understand more about our own aging and about those around us. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for this program, this beautiful evening. Actually, I was struck by, Michelle, you were speaking of collaboration in terms of this process, and I was wondering if also, Gabri, for your work, of also integrating your experience with your mother, if you wanted to speak more on that collaborative sense in your work, and if this is a long question, and how perhaps collaboration, that sense from this film has traveled in your other work. So, Gabri and Michelle.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think about I mean, I think. You know, I'm a very solitary. I mean, I do illustrations and I do various like solitary work. So making a film and it was very solid. It was just the two of us for a really long time, and so once it got out of, then it became a much bigger thing. So you've got to, I mean, you missed the end credits there, but like there's like, you know, 600 Kickstarter backers and like all these people that we had to pay and to make you know, the post production, because if you don't, you know, have any, if you're not filming with intention, the sound is bad, the picture's bad, the color's off, you know, their mic was on her back, the mic was on the floor. So, I mean, for me, collaboration is, and now I have like this whole world of theater friends, and I'm very involved in, like, you know, my partner's a theater director, and so I get to see collaboration in all different forms. So I only know what we did, which is sort of unconventional, and I always thought that we were gonna take it to the end together in terms of we were gonna edit it together, and we were gonna, so the joy of it, the joy was in the process of making it, and the joy was in the editing in a certain way, but it was less, but I don't really know if I'm answering your question right now, I'm just sort of talking in circles. But yeah, I mean, I'm learning what it means to collaborate now without Irene. Because I just think, you know, when you find a good collaborator, you want to keep going. And so now I'm starting to do projects with other people, and that's a whole different thing. People are like, what are you working on next? And I'm always surprised by that question, because it's like when one of Irene's costume designers said, you can't create magic, you have to respond to it. And so I feel like I may or may not make another film, but like, but yeah, so it's the hope for that magic to appear. I didn't really answer that question, but go ahead. Your turn.
Can I jump in? Just that I've heard what you say is that one collaboration doesn't necessarily help you with the next one.
That's
except
true.
that you got through the first one. It's like, okay, I can do this again, but the rules are going to be all different, right?
Well, but isn't that the way with unless you have like a collaborator that you work with every single time, you know, like a theater company or that kind of thing, it's always going to change, right? So the nature of it changes.
Well, guys here, I've been talking about it. I've, through this process, but actually, I just came up with something that, not just now, just sitting here, but a few weeks ago, thinking about collaboration and teaching, and I actually thought that what I learned is that collaboration is about curiosity, and curiosity for each other. And if you both are curious, you're good, and also committed to the thing, and not attached to your material or opinion. And that's kind of what I got from.
And not attached to the outcome.
And I'm not attached to the outcome
Yeah.
either. Like you have to, like the process, the question that you're answering. So, and yeah, with my mom, it started very similar, because I wasn't going to make a piece about my mother or dementia. I just was knowing that something was wrong with her memory, and I wanted her to write down what she remembered. So I sent her by hand letters that she would respond to. So. Yeah, and then I showed her some stuff that I was doing, but by now she doesn't know that I did something, like by the time that I decided to make work with her material, like she didn't really realize it anymore. Yeah.
I know that Irene is in the room right now, but I wanted to ask, what actually can you tell us about what happened after we don't see her on the screen anymore?
Yeah, it's so basically in Miami, we left her in Miami, and we ended up leaving her there. She never came back to New York. Well, she came back to New York. It was a complicated family situation. So she was staying with a sister in Miami. Then her nephew. It was just like there was some complicated family dynamics, and her guardianship was switched. And then she ended up moving to Oneonta in New York, which is like 5 hours. I mean, she did come back to New York, but not New York City. And so she was living in an assisted living facility in Oneonta, and we would go out like 3 or 4 times a year to see her. And then her health declined, and she was brought back to the city eventually to Amsterdam nursing home. There's a longer story there, but that's the short end of it. So she died in October of 2018.
What age was that?
She was 88. Oh my God.
88?
She was 88.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, Amsterdam Nursing Home is across the street from St. John the Divine, a few blocks from here. So Irene spent her last years in our neighborhood.
Yeah, with a view, she had a view of St. John the Divine right outside of her window, which was really lovely.
Any other thoughts? Any Barnard students, or sir, you, yes? Home field advantage, I guess.
If there are any other Barnard students who have questions, I'm happy to take the floor. This isn't really I was just curious, we often say in the creative process that we have to kill our darlings, and I was wondering if in the making of this particular film there was anything that, footage-wise, that you really wanted to include but couldn't for the sake of relevancy?
Well, it's interesting because we're making a book right now of all the outtakes. So we're working on a book of, in a Q&A, someone asked what happened to all the things that weren't, because there were 500 hours. So there's quite a lot that, and so, but a lot of it's been transcribed, and so, I mean, there were definitely things that were in samples over the years that I knew, like there's this one moment where I say, who is Irene, who are you? And she's like, Irene is this person, and she goes off on this whole wonderful monologue. She's very, very, very beautiful. She's very, very, very smart. And it started every sample for grants that we get, like it was, and she was just so, she's a dancer, like Pavlova, shush, you know, she does this whole thing, and it's amazing, and it totally, I was like, we can't fit it in here. And there were so many moments that were, but that was one of them. There was a lot of stuff between the two of us that wasn't really relevant, and a lot of like meandering in Cuba. For one of our cuts I was like, we were adrift in Cuba for like 3 hours. I was like, oh my God, we're stuck in Cuba. How are we gonna get out? So. Because I mean, it's so beautiful to be in Cuba, but you know, at a certain point you have to worry about story. But yeah, so hopefully that book will be coming out. It's called the completely incomplete Maria Irene Fornes. Yeah. So that will be happening at some point, and hopefully not in the next couple of years. So.
Just from the time that you knew her, Michelle, what do you think, what did you feel was Irene's greatest source of joy?
Creating anything. I mean, basically the act of creation. And that ties into observation. So, I mean, she was always the one you'd walk down the street and she would be like, look at that, you know, little tower on the top of something, and you would be like, oh, I completely was going to walk by and miss that. I mean, she was always pointing me, you know, and I'm never aware of anything around me, and she was just like, oh, look at that, look at that. There's also something about, I had something to say, it'll come back to me. But yeah, I lost what I was going to say, but hopefully it'll come back. But I'd say, you know, her greatest source of joy also was just about, it's about being with people. So, you know, I mean, being surrounded by, and as a theater person, that was, I mean, being in the rehearsal room, being around people. People will ask, why don't you talk about her plays more in the film? And this comes up time and time again. And I said, because, you know, by the time I knew Irene, she didn't remember writing Mud or writing Pfeffer and Her Friends or writing, she didn't remember her plays. So, there wasn't, I mean, we had archival footage of her talking about her, you know, writing, but if Irene didn't remember it, then we weren't going to include it. So that was really, once we became very clear on like what we were going to include and not include, so it's basically like, and in the same way it's the Susan Sontag stuff, so everyone's like, well, why didn't you put more in about Sontag? And I was like, well, that's all we got. I've been waiting I waited for years for Irene to talk about Susan, and in the loudest cafe in Cuba, my camera person is in a Speedo on the beach, and I'm stuck with the camera, and it's so loud, and there's this, I don't know, you probably didn't notice it, but it's like the most famous Mexican love song is going on in the back. Thank God for fair use, because we didn't have to pay for that song, but like it just comes out, Susan, and then it was never mentioned again. And then, that was it. And so people are like, what happened to that? And I was like, well, that was it. That's what I remember. So we're not gonna like go off on a whole section in Cuba and like have talking heads talking about Susan Son. I mean, that would have been a real feat and a terrible idea. So, but yeah.
I love that you didn't have all the talking heads. I really just love that, because it really made me stay with her.
Yeah. You had to, I mean, we tried to do it without them at all, but I was like, you need people to, because she doesn't remember her past, and, so you need people to populate that past, also to take us there. And also they were really lovely interviews with people, so, and I wanted to include more of her students, but like, you couldn't really, it was hard to fit everything in, but yeah.
I think we could have one more. Maggie, is that you?
It is me. I am wondering, before you met Irene and before you started embarking on this project, when it was that you first encountered her work and what it was, and if meeting her and spending time with her changed, I guess, your perception of what she wrote, or if you felt like you were able to sort of get a deeper grasp on it after knowing her.
Well, the first, I took a playwriting, I was a journalism major in college, and but I always wanted to write plays. My brother's an actor. And I took a playwriting class, and we read The Comic of Life. And that play I was like, who is this playwright? I'd never heard of her. I didn't know, anything about her. But there's a monologue in this play, Olympia, talking about, like, doing the day-to-day routine of set. I was just like, this is genius. I mean, who writes like this? I didn't even know that people could write plays like that. So I got all of her plays, and then I was writing, and then I started writing about theater. And so, there was a piece that I interviewed her for was about playwrights retaliating against critics. And so I thought, if anyone's I bet Irene has some really good stories, but how am I gonna reach her? And she was listed in the phone book. And so I went back in the day when there was a phone, the yellow pages, the white pages, and she picked up the phone, and I said, hi, my name's Michelle, and I'm writing this article. I don't know where it's gonna go, but I'd love to interview you. And she was like, okay, great. And so she met me, and that was like a 6-hour. So anyway, so that was the beginning of our friendship. But like, over the years, I've read her plays so many times. I see Promenade, in terms of her work, like I see Fefu and Her Friends in this movie, I see Promenade in this movie, I see and in a lot of ways her plays they're never afraid to go to the dark places. So it gave me permission to go to dark places in the film. I was like, when we were creating it. So, and now I just go to productions of her plays all over the place, and so and I wanted to be a playwright, and once I started working with her, I realized I had no talent in that field at all. I was like, there's no way that I will ever be able to write a play. But people remind me, they're like, you know what, the movie is the play. So I kind of like to think of it as the play that I never wrote. But I do think that I understand her work a lot better than I ever would. I mean, it's still, some of it does, some of her plays are more challenging to me than others. Alice, you would have more to say about her work in terms of actually putting it up on the stage. But yeah, so it definitely has helped me, but I still have a little ways to go.
I would say, just from directing a lot of her plays, several in this room, with some of you, I don't think the film helps at all. I think she's so surprising and impish and funny and silly and perverse is the word I'm reaching for. She's a perverse human being. And I think that actually sitting down and talking with her about the plays wouldn't be helpful. I think this is a playwright where she puts it all on the page and saves herself. Do you know? She puts the dark stuff out there so she can have a happy life and sing.
I disagree, but we can talk about that later.
Great. We're gonna stop there. Okay, I have 2 related plugs. Okay, the first is that the first show in the theater department's spring season is a play called Town Hall. It's written by Caridad Svich, who was a longtime student of Irene's and has written extensively about how Irene has influenced Caridad's work. So that's the first thing we're doing. Second thing we're doing in the department is the Senior Thesis Festival. One of the plays in the festival is The Danube by Maria Irene Fornes. So the legacy of Fornes lives on in this department and in this community. Please go outside and recept. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, everyone. And one block, April 4, we have the Moving Body, Moving Image Festival, and it's around an aging moving body, including some works on dementia.